Hi, I think we're live. This is my first time doing this because I've been involved in a lot of live streams before, but it's usually the very gifted David Gray Hammond that hosts it all. So this is a bit new to me, but welcome to this, the first in a series of Club Autism live streams. I'm your host, Charlie Hart. I'm also known as Awesome Charlie, and that's awesome with an AU for autistic. Today I'm joined by my good friend across the Atlantic, Ben VanHook. It's still Autism Acceptance Month, just about. So in today's Club Awesome Live, we'll talk about autism, but through the lens of intersectionality, which Ben and I are both passionate about. Ben, could you introduce yourself, please, and tell us a little about yourself?
Yes, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Ben VanHook. I'm an autistic and ADHD master's student at George Mason University. I study public policy with an emphasis in education policy, and I'm also a disability rights activist fighting for universal design and providing guidance to different schools and employers on how to create a more neuro-inclusive classroom and workplace environment. Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. Thanks so much for being here, Ben. Intersectionality is a theme that Ben and I often explore in our social media posts and in our neurodiversity advocacy work. But not everyone knows what this even is. So let's break it down. Before we explore why an intersectional approach is so important in neurodiversity advocacy, let's understand what it means. What does neurodiversity mean? Well, firstly, neurodiversity is a concept that recognises and respects the natural variation in human cognition. Every brain and mind is unique, and we all think, feel, and process the world uniquely. Yes, we have some things in common due to similar neurotypes, but autism and ADHD are broad spectrums, and they affect every individual differently. And they even affect the same individual differently at different times in life. So, like with hormone changes, getting older, even day to day, even within the same day, like if we get overwhelmed. Ben and I are both autistic and ADHD, but we're very different from each other. And not just that he's only half my age. Intersectionality, on the other hand, that acknowledges the interconnected nature of social categorizations, such as race, gender, sexuality, disability. I could go on and on and on. Some of those are protected characteristics and some of them are not. But when we talk about neurodiversity and intersectionality together, we can examine how those identities intersect and shape an individual's experiences and opportunities. Is that how you understand intersectionality too, Ben? Or have you got a more succinct definition you could share, or another angle?
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing your insights into intersectionality. And I view intersectionality very similarly. I see it as the interplay of multiple different identities creating and forming a unique lived experience for an individual. For example, my disability advocacy stems from my own lived experience as a disabled person, but it's also influenced by several of my Jewish values, including Tikkun Olam, which is repairing the world, Kavod, which translates to respect, Gemlut Hasidim, which translates to loving kindness, and Tzedakah, which is philanthropy and charity. In intersectional identity can have many positives and negatives. On the positive end, it can create a very unique worldview and allow one to understand and consider things others might miss or overlook. This can be very beneficial when it comes to team meetings and working within the advocacy space. For example, I was on a research call last night, actually, where I and two other student representatives at the American Psychological Association's Division 33 were introducing our organization to the first cohort of our Division 33 Graduate Advisory Council. Although the meeting went smoothly and some great ideas were pitched, there was a noticeable lack of diversity in our cohort. I was the only non-white person in the meeting, and I pointed this out to the other organizers at the conclusion of that meeting. This may have gone under the radar or had been ignored completely had I not been a part of this meeting. You may have also heard the phrase, if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. This quote very much sums up the impact of intersectionality. A white autistic person may have a fundamentally different lived experience from an Asian autistic. An Asian autistic adoptee may have a very different experience from an Asian autistic who was not adopted. Rather than jumping into a certain policy or procedure and assuming what's good for some disabled people is good for all, an intersectional lens and approach may be more helpful in discussing complex issues facing the disability community. On the negative side of things, friendlessness, loneliness, bullying, harassment, and frequent invalidation can accompany intersectionality. It can be very hard for people, even fellow disabled people, to understand someone of multiple marginalized identities. The more intersections you have, the harder it can be to find people who understand you, and it can feel very isolating and lonely. As I'm a Chinese born Jewish neurodivergent adoptee, it's hard to find people who exactly match my profile. Even if someone is a Jewish neurodivergent and can understand me from a neurodivergent and Jewish lens, they may not understand the impact racism has on me. Similarly, a Jewish Asian may not understand disability or neurodiversity and why I might need an accommodation. For example, although I can connect with other neurodivergents, when COVID was starting and when COVID was happening, there was a large spike in hate crimes against Asians. And I was often seen as overdramatic or extreme for being too afraid to go back to college. An analogy I can use when describing the social experience of intersectionality could be a dating app, the filters on a dating app. The more filters you have on, the less potential matches you will have access to and be shown. You'll be shown more people if you search for matches in the United States, as opposed to matches in the United States who don't smoke, has a dog, and enjoys visiting museums.
Yeah.
An intersectional lens is very important to consider because oftentimes, even within the disability community, people of color are left out of the conversation. For example, many of the most influential figures in the disability community, such as Judy Singer, Stephen Shore, and Temple Grandin, are all white. Many of the most influential public speakers, presenters, bloggers, and trainers in disability are also white. This is unrepresentative of the disability community as a whole, given that 20% of the global population is disabled, and 80% of those come from developing countries. In the United States, according to the University of Massachusetts, 1 in 4 disabled people are Black, 1 in 5 are Pacific Islanders, 1 in 6 are Hispanics, 3 in 10 are Native Americans, and 1 in 10 disabled people are Asian American. A majority white influence is very harmful because the needs of different communities within the global majority may and do differ from that of white people, and our needs as multiply marginalized people may be misrepresented, if at all. We need to amplify the voices and stories of disabled people of color, for if only white people speak for us, it erases and minimizes our unique lived experiences, stories, and challenges.
Absolutely. It could even be a bigger problem than that, given that autistic and ADHD and other disabilities, people of colour, they can encounter discrimination based on their race and their neurodivergent traits, and also systemic barriers to diagnosis and healthcare. And then the struggle to find culturally competent support. So, understanding those intersecting dynamics is key to creating inclusion, meaningful inclusion across society. So you've shared your insights into the unique challenges you face as an autistic American from Chinese ethnicity. Is there anything more that you want to expand on that theme, or shall I go on to talk about my intersections myself?
Yeah, so it has been really difficult living as a Chinese born American autistic. From the age of around 5 or 6, I never truly felt as if I belonged in the United States. I was often made to feel like an outsider. In school, I would be bullied for my race and ethnicity. People would ask me why my eyes were always shut. They would tell me nearly every day at 9 years old to go back to my own country. Some of my friends in elementary school even betrayed me. I was around 8 years old and I was hanging out with some people I thought were friends on a Saturday afternoon. We were just playing some computer games and watching Brian Regan, who is a comedian. But in the middle of our fun, my friends thought it would be a great idea to show me a YouTube video, which is still online, called Stuart Goes to the Chinese Restaurant. In the video, Stuart, who's the main character, goes to a Chinese restaurant with his parents and asks the waiter for a Happy Meal from McDonald's. His mother tries to explain that they don't serve Happy Meals, and Stuart, out of the blue, blurts out, "Then I hate the Chinese." My friends saw it, triggered a reaction within me, and within a few days, the whole grade was saying, "I hate the Chinese," to my face to see what I would do. I felt alienated, betrayed, and abandoned. The teachers were next to useless. They failed to punish the bullies and even sided with them, saying that they were only joking or called me overdramatic. Sometimes I myself would be punished for causing a scene or reacting to the very real harm and threat of bullying and racism. Essentially, the teachers allowed me to get hurt and took away my ability to defend myself.
I'm
Um,
so sorry to hear that.
if masking if masking as a disabled person wasn't hard enough, imagine trying to mask whilst having racial insults hurled at you like every day without consequences to the perpetrator. Dealing with racism as an ADHD also provides a whole new set of barriers because my immediate impulse as an ADHD is to fight back and defend myself. To me, the greatest form of defense is attack because I learned from a really young age that no teacher and no parent will understand me enough to protect me from the harms of racism, abuse, and bullying. And I found the only way to get bullying to stop was to hit back twice as hard and to
Yeah.
show them not to mess with me. There were a few instances where this occurred in school, where I got into numerous physical altercations because someone made a racist remark towards me. There was one instance at lunch where I pushed someone into a group of plastic blue chairs in the cafeteria in front of everyone after they said, "Hey Ben, I hate the Chinese." Now I fight and I still have some impulsive tendencies, especially around racism, but rather than physical altercations, I use my words to fight. This
It's so
is,
difficult though, isn't it? Because
it is,
we
yeah.
have the emotional dysregulation and justice sensitivity, and there's rejection sensitive dysphoria, all of that. And then the loneliness of being the only person with your characteristics and nobody that's on the same wavelength with a similar background that can really empathize with you and say you're not alone.
Mhm,
Yeah, this is. I'm listening to you, and I'm immediately thinking about my son. You know, my son ended his life at the age of 15 after getting tormented by bullies at school. He was autistic. He was also gay. The kids at school called him weird. They had this game where they used to run away from him, going, "Oh, don't let Iggy near you. You'll catch his weird." And
that is
he
heartbreaking.
must have felt so isolated, even though he did have a small group of friends who were on his side. But yeah, and like me, I, I, I got picked on at school for being weird and different. I didn't know I was autistic, but I knew I was bisexual and that my brother was autistic and my dad's an alcoholic, and there was various things going on. I was from an economically disadvantaged background where I went to school with no uniform, which is unusual here. So the trendy kids with money, they're the ones that ruled the roost, and they used to mercilessly torment any kids that couldn't afford the latest fashions, which was this was the 90s, and it was those awful crinkly shell suits and ski jackets and head bags and things. But they made my life a misery. So rather than choosing my words, I used to practice taekwondo. So twice a week, I'd go to a 2-hour taekwondo class till I was built like a brick shit house and I could stand up for myself. And then they left me alone to a certain extent. But I would choose to walk 2.5 miles each way between my house and school rather than get on a school bus, because there, if there's a bullying incident, you can't get away from it. There's no escape. So I'm really rambling a bit now, but yeah, I feel your pain, and Yeah, let's just get rid of that myth about autistic people don't have empathy, because it is such rubbish. I'm feeling the feelings with you.
And I am with you as well, and your son, and what you and your son have both
Yeah,
endured. And it's heartbreaking that your son had to go through all of that to this day. And I think it's important to note that, like, we can't really ignore transphobia, we can't really ignore like homophobia, we can't really ignore racism. Like, a lot of teachers think that we could just ignore it, like it's nothing and it doesn't exist, but
that's the
it
point of
absolutely
this intersectional approach, isn't it? We will need to support all kinds of people with all kinds of blends of characteristics, and we all have some differences that we're born with, and we all have the way that our brains are shaped through our experiences over time. So I've got complex PTSD, and if somebody threatens me or one of my kids, then I can lash out as well. I'm like an animal backed in a corner. So I'm not going to carefully choose my words if I feel threatened, or if I feel like my surviving two kids are threatened. So I'm trying to sort of find a way of de-escalating myself if I get into one of those meltdowns, and it is
so hard.
getting there.
It can be so hard to regulate yourself after someone's attacked you or said rude or mean things towards your children or people you care about.
Absolutely. Now, when we talk about intersectionality, I think it's really helpful to examine our own worldview. So sometimes I've seen neurodiversity advocates say, well, I'm only going to talk about neurodiversity, or even I'm only going to talk about autism, because they don't want to weigh in on things like whether trans and non-binary people have a right to exist and to own their own identities. So they just talk about things with quite a narrow view. Um, I think that if you understand your own worldview and the fact that other people have got this worldview that's very different, that we can get past that limiting kind of frame of mind. So I recognise that in many ways I'm privileged. I live in a really nice village. I'm just outside Birmingham, but in the countryside. My country is not war torn. I live in England. I own my own home with my second husband, who I still like. Yeah, this one's a keeper. I'm in a straight passing relationship, so I'm not getting attacked for my sexuality. I'm financially stable. I'm in good physical health. So those are all things that bring me privilege. But I'm also marginalised. So, for example, I had a difficult childhood for many reasons. I touched on some of them earlier. I am bisexual. I'm autistic and ADHD, both of which went undiagnosed for over 40 years, which impacted my mental health. I've faced barriers to inclusion, both in education and work, long battles with mental health, such as anxiety, recurring depression, complex PTSD, many, many things that I'm struggling to cope with, and I'm getting there over time. Being autistic and bisexual is an interesting intersection. So we call, when you're both neurodivergent and LGBT, we can call that the double rainbow, because we're on two spectrums, and both the LGBT community and the autistic and neurodivergent community use rainbow imagery. So I like that image, but it can be really difficult to navigate, because when you're autistic, you're already having issues with understanding social cues and communicating, making new friends, making a good impact at work, that kind of thing. And then when you're LGBT, you can have your intentions misunderstood. If you're autistic and LGBT, then you can really say the wrong thing and come across not how you mean to. And so it's, to me, it's a really interesting intersection. But I knew I was bisexual from when I was 16 or so, and I didn't know I was autistic until I was 42. So to me, it's interesting to look at those intersections, and then from there to understand other people's worldview and their intersections, and how they combine together to form like a unique profile of marginalisation and privilege. And just because we're multiply marginalised doesn't mean we don't have an element of privilege as well. And I think that's really important to remember. If my worldview and my advocacy was only focused on the identities that I have, I would only ever be a self advocate. But I want meaningful inclusion for people with all kinds of minds and identities and backgrounds. So it's absolutely not enough. What do you think about that approach, Ben?
Yeah, I first want to thank you for your courage and vulnerability and opening up about your experiences in being a part of the LGBTQIA plus community and some of the barriers that you have faced like throughout your childhood, throughout your adulthood, and especially when it comes to different opportunities. So I wanted to thank you for opening up about all of that.
Thank you for encouraging me.
As for the as for the question, I think it's a really interesting one, and I can relate to it. I can relate to your experiences, maybe in a different way, but a lot of what you said resonates with me. I can share a bit about my adoption because I think that is most relevant.
Yes, yeah.
I
Again,
I
that's an intersection I know nothing about. So I'm keen to listen and learn more about how it impacts you and what considerations would make society more inclusive for you with that respect.
mhm. Yeah, so I am only the eighth ever international adoptee from my home province in China. It's a province called Heilongjiang, with its capital being Harbin, which is world renowned for its ice festival each year. International adoption from China was only signed into law in 1992, and I was adopted in 2000. And my adoption certificate even has the number 8 on it, indicating it was only the eighth ever certificate issued. To some people, my adoption could be seen as privilege because there are many Chinese adoptees who aged out of the system or are still in the system who have no home, nowhere to go, and have no family. I'm also college educated and I have the freedom to speak about disability, which is something I might not have been afforded had I still been in China due to the stigma surrounding disability. But at the same time, the very blessing of adoption could be seen as a curse. Being Asian in the United States comes with a lot of racism, xenophobia, and sometimes even violence. As mentioned before, during COVID, there were a lot of hate crimes against Asian Americans,
As
and
if it's your fault.
I've also been met with countless instances of macro and microaggressions, such as white people in the store saying "ni hao" to me or "konnichiwa" to me to get my attention.
That's Japanese, isn't
I
it?
know. They
Yeah.
assume my culture. They assume my cultural incompetence, and they assume I don't really know how to speak English. And another good one is when people just say, "Wow, your English is so good," and I'm like, "Thank you. I've lived here my whole life." So I get a lot of different microaggressions met my way. A few ways like this that adoption impacts me is through like just fears of abandonment, fears of like losing friends, and as a result, friendships can be really hard. I can find boundaries really hard because I want to do everything I can to keep my friends. I don't want to lose anyone.
Yeah.
So a lot of
I've
times,
noticed that because you and I have been close friends for quite a while now, actually, probably getting on for a year.
wow, it's
And you're a valued friend. But if
thank
you think I disagree with an approach you've taken, you're always thinking that I'm going to block you and abandon you. And
yeah,
I have to keep reassuring you that we could have a row, in fact, and I wouldn't do that. Let alone I slightly disagree with a slant you've taken or something.
you are too kind.
No, no, I try to be kind enough. Yeah, I think
Um,
you haven't had enough people that are kind to you, and you've had too many people that have treated you in some shitty ways. And yeah, we need to. Yeah,
it
you're worth it. Yeah, you've
has
got a lot
gotten
to offer.
it has gotten a bit better, like going on LinkedIn, like after graduating college and finding a disability community on LinkedIn where I feel safe and heard and validated. So that has helped me like socially, but also it's helped my mental well-being because I feel like my experiences aren't really weird anymore, and I feel like
Yes.
things I'm feeling are actually like things I'm feeling. And because oftentimes, especially when I was younger, I was called over dramatic, or I was like just told I was like an attention seeker. I wasn't really allowed to like do things that really helped me. So when it came to things like staying in my room during a social situation like a party, or if I needed a break from my family during like a family gathering or during Thanksgiving, I would often be scolded for like not being with the family.
Yeah.
My I would sometimes be told like grandma's not going to live forever. You need to spend time with her. When I just wanted a 5 to 10 minute break. So
It's so hard. I
if
mean, I've
you,
made a lot of mistakes in my own parenting journey, but
mhm.
it's only since my own diagnosis with autism and then realizing I've got ADHD as well that I've really started to self advocate, but advocate for my kids' needs as well.
And
So,
as
like, I
someone
won't
who,
have people telling them they're fussy about certain foods, for instance, because I know that they've got uh, texture related sensory sensitivities and things like that.
I
But
am the same way.
go
I
back a
can't be
few years and I would have been telling our sons, no, do what you can to fit in, you know. And now I'm thinking, no, don't let anybody ever tell you to fit in because you're wonderful exactly as you are.
just be yourself, right?
Yeah,
And I definitely relate. I can't really eat fish because of the texture. It just oftentimes tastes like a salty jello because it's so
yeah,
soft. And I also can't, I love pancakes and waffles and like barbecue, but I can't eat that because it's so sticky on my fingers.
yeah,
The only way someone can make me eat it, and I really want to eat like pancakes, is like by tying my hands behind my back and
yeah.
then feeding me like a child because I
I
don't want
don't
to.
like getting my fingers sticky either. And
I can't. Yeah, I can't do that.
yeah,
As it relates to your worldview, I agree completely, and I'm the same way. I do think that true disability advocacy includes fighting for everyone within a community. I think if we only advocate for one subsection of a community, then we're not really advocates at all, and we become the people we don't want to be. We become people who contribute to the
yes,
elimination or minimization and further marginalization of disabled people if we only focus on a few people. I actually see selective advocacy as modern day eugenics because if we focus on affluent, cis white disabled people, then we're choosing that some disabled people are worth supporting and other people are worth leaving behind. So I think
yeah.
we need to
Right
fight for.
back to the invention of Asperger's syndrome in the Second World War. Yeah,
Mhm.
these neurodivergent kids are useful to society, and these ones for the gas chamber. Yeah, it's not good enough. I totally agree. And as somebody with a brother who has quite severe learning disabilities, as well as being autistic and ADHD, his life matters just as much as mine. So it's something I
Mhm.
feel very strongly about. That's why I don't call myself a Aspie or say that I've got Asperger's syndrome. I'm autistic, he's autistic. I'm not worth any more than him as a person. Having learning disabilities isn't a moral failure. It doesn't make you a rubbish person. So
It just
I'm going
makes
off
you.
on one now, but yeah, I completely agree with you. And actually, it's a really nice way to wrap it up. I'd like to keep this to half an hour if we can, because I know a
Mhm.
lot of our viewers have got ADHD and I don't want to ramble on and labour the point. So I just wanted to say, though, everyone who's watching, just listen to this marvelous young man. He's got so much to offer and so many valuable insights. And he's done quite a lot of conferences and speaking events, but people rarely offer to pay him, and that isn't okay. So, this isn't to wheel out someone who's multiply marginalised and exploit them as well. Speaker agents, please get Ben on your books. Conferences, book him as a keynote speaker. Let's elevate each other and give more of a platform to people from marginalised identities, but without exploiting them. Okay, I'm going to shut up now. I'm going off on one again. Have you got any final comments then, Ben, before I end the stream?
Yeah, thank you so much for this insightful conversation and for sharing your own experiences. I think it was very valuable and it was just so emotional just hearing what you've also been through and some of the experiences you've also encountered. I do want to end by providing some actionable tips for people to support marginalized communities.
Yes, please.
Um, One of the most important things you can do is to lead through validation and compassion. By leading through validation, you can begin to build trusting relationships and friendships, and you can also begin to learn with in a like non-judgmental space from neurodivergent people of color, and they can feel safe sharing different parts of their lived experiences with you. Another thing you can do is increase the visibility and amplifying the voices of disabled global majority content creators, like you said, Charlie. You could also include more disabled people of color on your board of directors for different organizations, so we can have a more intersectional approach when it comes to different company procedures and policies and things that other people might not have considered before. And similar to what you mentioned, it's also important to hire disabled people of color as speakers, panelists, and trainers. And I want to end
With
on
payment, please. Yeah.
yeah, with payment. But I want to end on this point that the purpose of an intersectional lens is not to take away seats from white neurodivergence, but it's rather to add more seats to the table.
Yeah,
So
definitely.
thank you so much for this conversation, Charlie. I think it was really insightful, and I
Thank you
really
so
enjoyed it.
much. Yeah. Thanks. Thanks for being here for the first instalment of Club Awesome, and I've got more planned. And the only rules of Club Awesome is everyone I have as a guest is neurodivergent or disabled. We're all from a mutually supportive kind of approach. And there was another one as well, but I've got ADHD and I've forgotten it. But I've got speakers coming up for about complex PTSD for World Mental Health Awareness Week. I've got deaf speakers about talking about deafness inclusion, and yeah, it's great. I'm glad this has worked. I think it's worked. I'm hoping that I'll find a video on all my social media platforms. If not, I'll upload them. But thank you very much, Ben, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon, and I'll enjoy the rest of my evening. And thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much for taking the time and for inviting me. I really appreciate it,
You're
and
welcome.
look forward to many conversations in the future.
Thank you.